This happened 3 summers ago, right after I finished my junior year of college. My parents had moved while I was away at school. They bought this old farmhouse way out in the sticks, about 20 minutes past the last gas station. I wasn't thrilled about it, but honestly, it was kind of nice being somewhere quiet for a few months. No roommates, no campus noise, just trees and cicadas and way too much free time. I got into fishing that summer mostly out of boredom. There was a state park about a 10-minute drive from the house, and I'd found this spot under an old wooden footbridge where the creek widened into a decent little pool. Nobody ever came down there. The bridge was part of some hiking trail, but it was one of those forgotten trails that only shows up on the park maps if you really look for it. I'd been there maybe 3 or 4 times already that summer, and I'd never seen a single person. Just me, the water, and whatever base felt like biting. This was late July. One of those evenings where the heat finally starts to break around 7 and you can actually breathe outside. I'd eaten dinner early and told my parents I'd be back before dark. Got to the bridge around 7:15, scrambled down the bank, set up my chair in my usual spot, right under the bridge where the shade kept the water cool. The creek was low that week. We hadn't had rain in almost 10 days, so the water was clear and slow. Perfect conditions. For the first hour or so, it was exactly the kind of evening you hope for. I caught a couple small bass, released them, just enjoyed the quiet. The sun was starting to dip behind the trees, turning everything that golden orange color that makes you forget to check your phone. I remember thinking I should probably head back soon, but I wanted one more cast. That's when I heard the footsteps. Just soft thuds on the wooden planks above me, someone crossing the bridge. Nothing weird about that. Even on a dead trail, sometimes a hiker wanders through. The footsteps got to the middle of the bridge right above my head, and then they just stopped. I waited for them to continue. They didn't. 10 seconds. 20. I started to get that prickle on the back of your neck. Not fear yet, just awareness. Something wasn't right. I leaned forward in my chair and looked up through the gaps between the planks, but I couldn't see anything except the dark underside of the bridge. Then I heard a soft creak, someone gripping the wooden railing. I stood up and backed out from under the bridge onto the creek bank, so I could see the top of the bridge clearly. And there he was, a kid, maybe 9 or 10 years old. Small, skinny, wearing what looked like a dark t-shirt and shorts. He was standing at the railing, both hands wrapped around the wood, staring straight down at the spot where I'd been sitting. And he was completely soaking wet, hair plastered flat against his forehead. His clothes were dripping, like actually dripping, water streaming off his shorts and pattering onto the bridge planks. It hadn't rained in over a week. There was no swimming area anywhere near this part of the creek. The water under the bridge was maybe 2 feet deep. "Hey," I called up, trying to keep my voice calm. "You okay? Are you lost?" He didn't answer, didn't even blink. Just kept staring down at the water with this blank expression, like he couldn't hear me at all. I called out again, louder. "Hey kid, where are your parents?" That's when he moved. He slowly turned his head toward me, not fast, not jerky, just this smooth of deliberate motion, and looked directly at me for the first time. His face was pale, not sick pale or scared pale, but cold pale. The kind of color you'd expect from someone who's been in freezing water for a very long time. He opened his mouth like he was about to speak, and water came out, a thin, steady stream pouring from his mouth, not like he was vomiting or choking, just flowing out like a tap left running. It splashed onto the railing and dripped down between the planks. He didn't cough, didn't gasp. He just stood there with his mouth open, water streaming down his chin, staring at me. My legs went cold, like physically cold. I remember my hands started shaking, and I couldn't make them stop. I just stood there on the creek bank, frozen, watching this kid pour water out of his mouth for what felt like forever, but was probably only 5 or 6 seconds. Then he closed his mouth, turned away from the railing, and walked calmly off the bridge toward the trail on the far side. The trail I knew for a fact dead-ended in thick brush about 30 feet in. I don't know what came over me, but I scrambled up the bank. Mud and rocks sliding under my shoes, branches whipping my arms. It took me maybe 30 seconds to get up to the bridge level, and by the time I did, the trail was completely empty. I ran down it anyway, crashing through the undergrowth until the brush got too thick to push through. Nothing. No kid. No wet footprints on the dry dirt. No broken branches. Nothing. I stood there breathing hard, sweat mixing with the scratches on my arms, and told myself I was losing it. Heat exhaustion. Dehydration. Something. But I couldn't let it go. I walked back to the bridge and looked at the railing where the boy had been standing. 2 small handprints. Perfectly formed, still wet, glistening in the fading light. I reached out and touched one. It was cold, not just cool from the water, but cold. The kind of cold that hurts your fingers after a few seconds. I yanked my hand back like I'd touched a stove. I didn't run to my car, but I didn't walk either. Somewhere in between. That fast walk thing you do when you're trying not to look scared, but every instinct is telling you to move. I didn't sleep that night. Just lay in bed replaying the image of that kid's mouth, the water, the way it just kept coming. By morning, I'd convinced myself there had to be an explanation. Maybe a prank. Maybe some local kids messing with a college kid from out of town. Maybe I really did imagine the water part. The light was fading. I was tired. I drove back to the bridge the next morning, parked in the same spot, walked down the same trail. The handprints on the railing were gone, dried away completely, not even a faint outline. I almost felt relieved. Maybe I had imagined it, but something made me check between the planks. I don't know why. I got down on my knees and ran my fingers through the gap where the railing met the bridge deck, and I felt something, a small, stiff piece of paper wedged deep in the crack. I had to dig it out with my thumbnail. It was a photograph, old, water damaged. The colors faded to that brownish-yellow tint you see in pictures from decades ago. A school portrait. A boy maybe 9 years old, wearing a collared shirt, hair neatly combed. The same boy from the bridge. I turned it over. On the back, in faded blue ink, someone had written, Daniel, grade 4, 1994. I sat there on that bridge for a long time just holding it. Then I went to the public library and spent 2 hours scrolling through microfilm archives of the local newspaper. I found the article in the July 19th, 1994 edition. Just 4 paragraphs buried on page 6. A 9-year-old boy named Daniel had been fishing alone in the creek under the bridge. He slipped on the rocks, hit his head, and drowned in less than 2 feet of water. His body wasn't found until 2 days later, caught in the roots of a fallen tree about 50 yards downstream. The article said he'd been carrying his grandfather's fishing rod, a gift for his birthday that same week. I've never gone back to that bridge, but last spring, after a heavy storm flooded the area, the local paper ran a small story about park rangers clearing debris from the creek. They'd found something tangled in the old bridge supports, a child's fishing rod, rusted and warped, buried in silt deposited decades ago. I didn't need to see a picture to know whose it was. Sometimes, when I'm driving past the park on rainy evenings, I glance down that turnoff toward the bridge. I've never seen anything, but I always wonder, if I went back at dusk, if I stood under that bridge and waited, would he still be there? Still wet, still silent, still gripping that railing with his small, cold hands? And if he opened his mouth again, would I finally have the courage to hear what he's been trying to say? I moved to that lakeside town in September, right when the summer crowds were finally thinning out and the rental prices dropped to something a normal person could afford. I'd gotten a job at the local community college, nothing glamorous, just IT support, and I'd found this small cabin about a 10-minute walk from the water. It wasn't much, but it had a porch that faced the woods and a landlord who didn't ask questions. After 3 years of city noise, it felt like a reset. There was this old wooden dock about halfway between my cabin and the main road. The kind of dock that's been there for decades, planks warped and silvered by weather, nails working their way up through the wood. moss growing in the cracks. The locals all use the newer public launch on the other side of the lake, so this one was always empty. I'd started going there on weekends with a fishing rod and a couple beers, just sitting at the end with my feet dangling over the water, not really caring if I caught anything. It was my spot. This was a Sunday in early October. The air had that crisp edge to it, still warm in the sun, but with a hint of what was coming. I'd walked down around 2 in the afternoon with my rod and a 6-pack, settled into my usual spot at the end of the dock. The fishing was terrible, not a single bite in almost an hour, but I didn't really mind. The lake was flat and quiet. The trees on the far shore were just starting to turn, and I had nowhere to be. That's when I noticed the phone. It was wedged between 2 planks about 3 feet from the end of the dock, face down, half hidden by shadow. I almost missed it. The dark case blended into the dark wood. At first I figured someone had dropped it and would come back for it. But when I pulled it out and wiped the dust off the screen, I realized it was still working. About 40% battery. No cracks on the glass. A relatively new phone, maybe a year old at most. The lock screen was blank except for one thing. A weather alert from 3 days ago. Severe thunderstorm warning. I remembered that storm. It had knocked out power across half the county. The alert was still sitting there unread, like whoever on this phone had set it down 3 days ago and never picked it back up. I should have just left it, taken it to the police station maybe. But curiosity is a hard thing to ignore, especially when you're alone on a dock with nothing else to do. I swiped open the phone app, and that's when the first cold finger traced its way down my spine. There was exactly 1 contact saved in the entire phone. Not mom, not work, not a single friend or family member. Just 1 entry, all caps, no phone number visible in the contact details, just the name. Do not answer. I stared at it for a long moment. Who names a contact that? And more importantly, who only has 1 contact in their entire phone, and it's a warning? I switched to the call log. My stomach dropped. 47 missed calls, all from do not answer. All within a 2-hour window, 3:14 p.m. to 5:22 p.m., 3 days ago. The day of the storm. The calls came relentlessly, every 2 to 3 minutes, one after another. 47 times someone, or something, had called this phone, and nobody had picked up, because the phone was already wedged between the planks of a dock. I scrolled further back through the call history, my thumb moving almost on its own. Before that day, the phone had normal usage. Calls to mom, texts to friends, photos of a dog, a sunset, someone's birthday cake. A normal person's phone. Then on the day of the storm, the calls from do not answer started. And after the 47th missed call, nothing. No outgoing calls. No texts sent. The phone just became a receiver for those 47 attempts, and then silence. I set the phone down on the dock beside me. My heart was beating faster than it should have been. I told myself I was being stupid. It was probably just a prank, some weird glitch, a spam caller the owner had labeled dramatically. But 47 times in 2 hours? And who labels a contact do not answer instead of just blocking the number? The phone rang. The screen lit up. Do not answer. I didn't move. My hand hovered a few inches above it, frozen. 4 rings. 5. 6. Then it stopped. Before I could exhale, my own phone buzzed in my pocket. I pulled it out. The caller ID displayed the same thing. Do not answer. My phone had no service at this dock. It never did. The nearest cell tower was almost 8 miles away, behind a ridge. I had never, not once, received a call while sitting on that dock. I hit reject. My hands were shaking now visibly. Silence. The lake was dead calm. No birds. No wind. Just me and 2 phones and the sound of my own breathing. My phone rang again. Same caller. I don't know what made me do it. Maybe some part of me needed to know, but I answered. Static. A low, thick static that sounded almost wet, like someone breathing through water. Then a voice. Barely a whisper. 3 words. Put it back. The line went dead. The stranger's phone immediately lit up with a text notification. I shouldn't have looked. I knew I shouldn't have looked. But I looked anyway. The message preview sat there on the lock screen. I know you have it. The dock. 47 calls. You're sitting exactly where he Saturday. I spun around. The parking lot at the top of the trail was empty. The lake was flat and gray, but about 50 yards down the shoreline, past the trees, near the old boat ramp that nobody used, a figure stood facing me, completely motionless. One arm raised, holding a phone to its ear. I didn't think. I didn't make a decision. My legs just moved. I dropped the phone onto the dock. I heard it clatter against the wood, and I ran. Not toward the figure, but back up the trail toward my cabin. Branches whipped my face. My lungs burned. I didn't look back once. I reached my cabin, slammed the door, locked it, and called the police from my landline. My voice was shaking so badly the dispatcher had to ask me to repeat myself twice. 2 deputies showed up about 20 minutes later. I walked with them back down to the dock, my heart still hammering the whole way. The phone was gone. The spot between the planks where I'd found it, empty. No sign it had ever been there. I told them where to look on the shoreline, where I'd seen the figure. They walked the area, pushing through brush, checking behind trees. Nothing. Nobody. One deputy gave me a look that said he'd dealt with weekend drunks before. The other one, younger, quieter, was standing near a large oak at the edge of the tree line. He called us over. Carved into the bark, the wood still pale and raw where the knife had cut, was a single word. Answer. Fresh. Maybe hours old. Sap was still beating along the edges of the letters. The deputies exchanged a look I couldn't read. They told me to stay out of the area for a while. Filed a report. Left. That was 6 weeks ago. I still live in that cabin. Still walk past that dock every time I go into town, because there's no other way. I've never seen the figure again. Never found another phone. But my own phone hasn't been right since that day. Random static on calls that never had static before. Texts that send into a void and never deliver. And once, just once, I woke up at 3 a.m. to a notification from a contact that doesn't exist in my phone and never has. Do not answer. I changed my number after that. Got a whole new phone. It didn't matter. Because sometimes late at night, when the lake is flat and silent and the moon is thin behind the clouds, I hear it. A phone ringing from somewhere down by the water. It rings exactly 47 times, and then it stops. I've never gone to check. I never will, but I know with a certainty that sits in my chest like a stone, that if I did, and if I answered, whoever is on the other end would have exactly one thing to say, and I'm not ready to hear it. I'd been working 60-hour weeks for almost 3 months straight. Nothing dramatic, just the slow grind of a job that kept asking for more than it paid for. By the time October rolled around, I was fried, so I did what any reasonable person would do. I called in sick on a Tuesday and went fishing. The reservoir was about 45 minutes from my apartment, a place called Clear Creek. It got busy on weekends, families with coolers, kayakers, kids throwing rocks in the water. But on a Tuesday morning in October, I figured I'd have the place to myself. I left before sunrise, stopped for coffee and a breakfast sandwich at a gas station, and pulled into the parking lot just after 7. There was one other car there, an older green Subaru with a faded parking pass on the dashboard, the kind that had been bleached by years of sun. I remember thinking, good, at least I'm not the only crazy person fishing on a weekday. I grabbed my gear and hiked down the main trail about half a mile to my favorite spot, a quiet cove on the eastern side where the water was deep and the tree cover kept the sun off your neck. I'd been coming here for years. I knew every rock, every submerged log, every spot where the trout liked to hide. I set up my folding chair on the bank, rigged my rod, and cast out. That's when I noticed him. Across the cove, maybe 200 yards, not far, a man was already fishing on the western bank. He was sitting in one of those low folding chairs, the kind with the cup holder in the armrest. He had a wide-brimmed hat on, the sort you see on guys who take their fishing seriously, and a dark jacket. His rod was propped in a holder beside him. The line was in the water. Classic setup. I raised a hand and waved. Friendly. The kind of wave that says, "Hey, fellow fisherman, beautiful morning." He didn't wave back. I didn't think much of it. Maybe he was focused. Maybe he was one of those guys who takes fishing so seriously that acknowledging another human being would somehow break the spell. I sat down and focused on my own line. The first hour passed quietly. I caught a small trout, released it, caught another. The sun climbed over the trees and turned the water that deep green color that makes you feel like you're the only person in the world. Every now and then I'd glance across the cove. The other fisherman was still there, still sitting, still facing the water. By 9 o'clock, I'd been there almost 2 hours. I had a couple of fish in my basket, and I was starting to think about packing up. I looked across the cove again. The man hadn't moved. Not once. He hadn't recast. He hadn't reached for a drink or a snack. He hadn't shifted in his chair. His line was in the exact same position. No ripples, no tugs, no adjustments. I told myself he was probably napping. It was warm. The sun was gentle. The sound of the water would put anyone to sleep. That was a reasonable explanation. That's what I told myself. But something was off. You know that feeling when you're looking at something and your brain is trying to tell you it's wrong, but you can't quite name why? I had that feeling. It sat in my stomach like a cold stone, getting heavier every time I looked across the water. Around 10, I decided to hike around the cove and introduce myself. Partly out of friendliness, partly because I needed to confirm that everything was normal, that I was just being paranoid, that the man was fine. Just a guy who fell asleep while fishing. Happens all the time. The hike around the cove took about 15 minutes. The trail curved through the trees, dipping into a small ravine before climbing back up to the western bank. When I emerged from the tree line, I could see him more clearly, maybe 100 feet away now, sitting in that chair on a flat patch of dirt right at the water's edge. I slowed down. Something was wrong with the jacket. It was stiff, not moving in the breeze. The breeze was there. I could feel it on my own face, but the man's clothing was still, like it was frozen in place. I kept walking. 50 feet now. His hands were resting on his knees, fingers curled, but the color was wrong. Dark, purple-black at the tips, mottled like something that had been left out too long. 30 feet. The hat. I could see it clearly now. The wide brim, the dark fabric, and I realized with a sudden, nauseating lurch that the dark color around the crown wasn't the hat's original color. It was a stain. Something had soaked through the fabric from the inside, spreading outward in a dark, irregular bloom. I stopped walking. The man wasn't napping. He wasn't fishing. He had never been fishing. He was dead, sitting upright in a folding chair on the bank of Clear Creek Reservoir. Dead, for what looked like days. I stumbled backward, my feet slipping on loose gravel. My heart was punching against my ribs, so hot I could feel it in my throat. I fumbled for my phone, hands shaking, no service. Of course, the cove was a dead zone. I turned and ran back through the trees, the branches whipping at my arms, my gear still sitting on the far bank where I'd left it. I didn't care. I ran until I reached the parking lot, jumped in my car, and drove toward town until I got bars. The 911 call was a blur. I remember my voice cracking, the dispatcher asking me to slow down, to repeat the location. They told me to wait at the trailhead. I sat on the hood of my car, hands still trembling, and tried to piece together what I'd seen. The stain on the hat, the mottled fingers, the complete unnatural stillness of a body that had been sitting there, posed there, for God knows how long. 2 deputies arrived about 20 minutes later. I led them down the trail, around the cove, pushing through the same brush I'd crashed through an hour earlier. My legs were weak. My mouth was dry. I kept thinking about the hat, the stain, the way it spread outward like something had bloomed inside it. We reached the western bank. The chair was empty. The rod holder empty. The fishing rod gone. The man gone. Just a flat patch of dirt at the water's edge. A few scattered pebbles and nothing else. The older deputy gave me a look I recognized. "There is this guy on something, look." I started stammering about the hat, the hands, the jacket that didn't move in the wind. I pointed at the dirt where the chair had been. "It was right here. He was right here." Then the younger deputy spoke up. Sir? Is this yours?" He was pointing across the water, toward the eastern bank where I'd been fishing, toward my spot. My folding chair was gone from where I'd left it. It had been moved, carried around the cove, across the water, through the trees, and placed on the western bank, in the exact spot where the dead man had been sitting. The cup holder still had my half-empty coffee in it. The armrests had my rod leaning against them. And in the seat of the chair, placed carefully, deliberately like an offering, was a single human tooth. The deputies went very quiet after that. They secured the area, called for backup. A detective arrived an hour later. They questioned me for 3 hours. Who was I? Why was I there? Did I know the Subaru in the parking lot? The Subaru. I'd forgotten about it until that moment. I looked around the parking lot. The green Subaru was gone. Days passed before I got answers. A detective called me. The tooth had been matched to a man named Gerald Kemper, 58 years old, who'd gone missing 3 weeks earlier. He'd told his wife he was driving up to Clear Creek for the day. Never came home. The tooth, a molar, had been forcibly removed from his jaw. Not knocked out, not naturally lost. Pulled. The rest of Gerald Kemper's body has never been found. I didn't go fishing again for almost a year. When I finally did, at a different lake, a crowded one, with families and kayakers and kids throwing rocks, I realized something that still bothers me. I had spent 2 hours that morning sitting across the cove from a dead man. 2 hours waving at him, glancing at him, telling myself he was just napping. And during those 2 hours, while I was casting and reeling and thinking about what to have for lunch, someone had placed that body there, posed it, and then while I was driving toward town to call 911, someone had come back and taken it away. The tooth was the message, left in my chair, moved to the exact spot, like a signature. I still have dreams about it sometimes. In the dream, I'm the one in the chair. I can't move. I can't speak. I'm sitting on the bank of Clear Creek Reservoir with a wide-brimmed hat on my head, and across the water, a man with a fishing rod is waving at me. He thinks I'm just another fisherman. He doesn't know. He can't see the stains spreading across my hat from the inside. He can't see my hands, dark mottled, curled on my knees. He just waves and waits and tells himself I'm probably napping, and I am screaming inside. But no sound comes out. No sound at all. Those are today's 3 stories. Honestly, the part that haunts me most is that single human tooth left sitting in the folding chair. It's absolutely bone-chilling. If you've ever had a similar encounter out on the water, feel free to share it in the comments. If you enjoy these true stories, remember to like and subscribe. I'll see you in the dead of night. And the next time you wave to a stranger across the lake, just make sure they wave back.